G'day everybody. I've got George Dvorsky, editor at IO9, a very popular online magazine devoted to progress in science and technology. We're going to discuss a little bit about the media performance of transhumanism, but especially anti-aging since Google announced their Calico efforts. So as Time put it, it would have been crazy. This is not Time's comment, but it would have been crazy to suggest researching anti-aging if it wasn't Google. That's what they said. Do you agree with that?
You know what? Yes and no. Certainly, what Google does by virtue of launching this institution is give the whole idea behind life extension and anti-aging a certain kind of credibility. And I think that's really the point of what Time Magazine's comment meant there. And when I first heard the news as well, that was my first thought was, wow, this really is a very powerful legitimizing force behind the radical life extension movement now. And it also kind of mirrors or it really kind of matches my own expectation as to where we were headed. Some 10 years ago when I first came across SENS and the work of Aubrey de Grey and even other like-minded gerontologists and even just the general thrust of where a lot of futurists were both predicting and advocating for, I figured that it was going to kind of start at that kind of at the fringe, if you will, and even at the level of the individual, where you had an individual or a small number of groups both working to advocate on behalf of life extension, but also even actively working in the labs to start to develop some kinds of measures to work towards anti-aging interventions. And of course, we've got Aubrey is probably the best example, and Methuselah Most Prize, and all those sorts of things. But I suspected that was going to be a kind of first generation thing. That what these people were doing was that they were basically getting the idea out there, trying to legitimize it in their own way, kind of come at it through a scientific perspective, through medical perspective, and show that it is capable, what we're capable of doing. But never in a million years would I have ever imagined that that's how it would be done. I always figured that it would eventually become integrated within the medical establishment itself. Because essentially, where there's perhaps a bit of a disconnect right now in the public's mind, and even I think to a certain degree in the medical establishment mind, is that medical science and progress in medicine is somehow separate from anti-aging interventions, and they're not. They're part of the same trend, the same thrust. And it's really what radical life extension is. It's just the logical conclusion of where the medical sciences are, where they've been leading us for literally hundreds and hundreds of years. So with Google now entering onto it, this is the start now, I think, of what will be a larger trend, and that is seeing a lot more money thrown behind it. There's even been a certain amount of cynicism behind the whole Google venture as well, which is that the only reason why they want to help people live longer is so that they can make more money off people who aren't dying, which I think is perhaps too severe, and that's a little too cynical. I mean, sure, obviously they want to make money, otherwise they wouldn't be doing this. But I think if you kind of strip it down a little bit and look at the numbers and look at maybe the bigger picture, one must also consider, of course, what you're doing when you're alleviating or even reducing the number of people who are dying, who are coming down with diseases and so on. And this is what we talked about at a life extension conference that the IEET held back in 2007 in Chicago, and it was literally entitled the longevity dividend, which is this idea that we as a society, we could save on the order of not billions of dollars, but trillions of dollars by not having people dying constantly, by not having people deal with every kind of disease you can think of. So what this would do in terms of the global economy, with the amount of money we would save, is tremendous. So I think it's a bit myopic and a bit simplistic just to kind of rib on Google for going about it in that particular way. I think it's a much bigger picture. And like I said, they're not going to be the first mega corporation to do this, nor will they. Or say they are the first, but they certainly won't be the last. Maybe even the age of the philanthropist. Like the Peter Thiels and so on, of funding this might be coming to an end as well. And now we're getting into maybe more of a public schema where we have stock, people maybe investing in obviously their stock and those sorts of ventures towards the life extension ventures. So I think that's kind of my primary takeaways from what Google has done recently.
Excellent. So, like, it does lend legitimacy to my mind as well. I mean, people feel as though now they've got the permission to discuss this in public without being laughed out
Oh,
of the
it's
conversation.
huge.
So,
It's absolutely huge.
yeah. And the longevity dividends that you mentioned before, I think that's an awesome way of framing it too. I mean, when you look at the amount that somebody could achieve if they could spend an extra 20 years in research is quite significant, and the amount of costs that people spend at the end of their life and how much money is sort of keeping people alive but feeble
Yeah.
is a lot, and we need to consider those sorts of things. The other problem I often see is when there's ventures, they often, especially when there's lots of money involved, they often get sidetracked by short-term payoffs, easier to hit targets, and like a relatively near-term technological spin-offs. However, Google's talking about moonshots, they're talking about long-term research, which is very similar to Aubrey de Grey's, I guess, long-term research ideas with SENS. And I think that's a distinguishing factor compared to other I guess largely funded initiatives, for instance, the War on Cancer and maybe even Larry Ellison's Foundation for Aging Research.
I think that's an excellent comment. I mean, a great observation, because we're so used to in the corporate world seeing those, not those moonshots like you said. They're definitely, they need to show what their return on investment can be in a very short amount of time, a very quick amount of turnover. And here you have a company that gets started up that really has this unbelievable long-term goal. I mean, maybe they haven't said so explicitly, but certainly it's been inferred that that is their intention, is to kind of solve the aging problem. But I think that I'm sure they're not stupid. I'm sure that they're not looking to get the return on investment in 30 or 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, or however long it will take. I'm sure that the model will be such that they can monetize whatever service offerings or research work that they're doing in a certain way. So I think that they will probably be profitable, or at least it might be a loss leader for a little while. But my suspicion is that while on the one hand they certainly have a view to the far future, I'm sure that they're going to be fiscally responsible, and they're going to create a kind of a business model for themselves that will work in the short term as well, and might even work to fuel further research down the line over the course of the next several decades.
And that's good news to anybody who's reaching middle age or beyond, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the big question, isn't it, Adam? Is like, where are we in terms of the story towards negligible senescence and the so-called dealing with the aging process. So where do we sit? Are we the last generation, or are we gonna miss out? But how exciting is it to see already very modern, very progressive corporations start to tackle it in such an incredible way.
Yeah, that's right. Another point is that there are a lot of smaller research efforts like the SENS Foundation and other research efforts that still do need money from people like Peter Thiel and smaller donations from the larger community interested in these sorts of things as well. So I wouldn't suggest putting all your eggs of hope in the one Google basket, because we don't know what Google is actually researching. We don't know whether they're actually going to be researching the right things, and they may have a limited domain of our research. So still funding things like SENS and Genescient, that's Gregory Benford's efforts, and others is an awesome thing to do. So I wouldn't want to take away from
I agree.
The impetus to do that. Yeah.
I agree. I just always get worried when it's philanthropists that are funding huge ventures, because it almost makes you wonder, like, why is it only being funded by philanthropists and eccentrics, or people that don't necessarily know what to do with their money, as opposed to actually creating something that could is like has that public legitimacy, or even business-minded people maybe behind it in terms of how they can operate it. But I like your idea as well of not putting all your eggs in one basket, even simply from the scientific perspective and the different medical approaches that will go into this. I'm also somewhat skeptical, and I always have been, of this thing that's like anti-aging interventions. Like I kind of do understand it to a certain degree that we do need to focus on those aging factors, and obviously Aubrey de Grey very famous for outlining 7 in particular. I think it's a good start, and I think that's certainly one place where we can start to approach these things. But I think that aging is such a massively multifaceted process. There's so many biological things going on that are contributing to the aging process, that at the same time I think cancer researchers are also doing, technically speaking, anti-aging work, or people that are looking into, of course, neurodegenerative disorders. Anyone who does any work on Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or anything, they are absolutely doing anti-aging research. So we need to look at it as part of the broader effort across the entire medical community to end any kind of infirmary, to end any kind of pathology, but particularly even age-related pathologies. So other things that we don't even understand, for example, are what kinds of pathologies will emerge when the body reaches 145 years old. New things are going to emerge, something we wouldn't have predicted. Some kind of weird brain glitch or some kind of weird visual problem. This is going to be a long-term, iterative process that's going to be, again, multifaceted, multidisciplinary across all the medical arenas. And again, to simplistically say, oh, we're going to have our little group over here solve aging is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. And it's never going to come in the form of a pill. It's going to come in the form of just this regular succession of interventions. Like you go to your doctor now.
Longevity escape velocity.
Longevity escape velocity. I love that term. And you go to your doctor now, and she'll tell you, you need this because you're otherwise you risk having that. But it's an incredible technological intervention that maybe wouldn't have existed 50 years ago. We don't question it, like, oh, this is going to save my life. So similarly, 40 years from now, your doctor's going to say, oh, you need to have this therapy, and this mitochondrial flush here. You need to have this kind of work done on your telomeres. It's standard. No one thinks of it as necessarily anti-aging. They look at it as just simply being part of what doctors do to you when you start to get sick and old and all those sorts of things. So my long-winded way again of kind of just maybe elaborating on your point there, Adam, about not putting all of our eggs in one approach or even one institution or even one particular way of even raising money when it comes to these sorts of ventures.
Definitely. Look, it's definitely a multifaceted problem, and we don't understand the problem to the degree that we need to. At least the community doesn't. Maybe Aubrey does, but the thing is, like, often people refer to the war on cancer as a failure because it didn't achieve eradicating cancer yet. But there have been like a lot of, I guess, fallouts from the research done that we wouldn't have probably had without the research happening in the first place. Let's just say, we research anti-aging in general for, a number of years, and we don't end up with what you said is a pill to make us live for very, very long periods of time. We might still find cures to diseases that have their roots in sort of the way that we age, although we may not be able to solve other problems with other diseases as we reach 145, as you suggest. I think it's interesting that the difference between the types of research focused specifically on things like Alzheimer's or cancer and the style of research focused on the process of aging. Without a solid theory on aging, maybe it will be very difficult to achieve in the long term the ultimate goals of getting rid of things like Alzheimer's and cancer.
Yeah, a couple of things I'll say about that. Well, how exciting is it, though, that we live in a time where we can even conceptualize what is aging now? Like, that's the paradigm shift, right? Is this so-called, or the idea that aging is a disease unto itself, and now we're breaking it down. We're getting so macro now when it comes to our understanding of the body and how it's aging that we can actually start to phrase things in that way. That's incredibly exciting, and and one even never knows. Like to hear you, to remind me of this again, the claim that the war on cancer has been largely a failure is so infuriating because really all it did was it just pointed to the complexity of the problem. It reminds me of a similar claim. I don't know who it was, but I'm sure some of your listeners will remind us. But I believe that it might have been even Rodney Brooks, the roboticist.
Right. Yes, he's Australian.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. He was. It's a totally different subject altogether, but he was told to give his robot vision over the summer. Like that, his professor thought it was going to be that simple a problem. Well, like just spend the summer on it, and you'll develop. I just needed to develop a kind of rudimentary robotic vision. Well, here we are in the year 2013, and we're still having real issues trying to come up with that kind of capacity for our robots, in the sense that the kind of vision that we would expect anyways that we want. Yeah. So my point being is that what seems initially to be a very simple problem explodes to incredible, not intractability, but just incredible complexity. And the other point I want to make about this is that when it comes to, let's say, cancer research in particular, what is it, at the very essence of it? It's of course the study and the mitigation of, cellular degradation, and not just cellular degradation, but cells that have gone completely squirrely on us. And if you just, shift a little bit your focus on and look on aging factors and how the role of cells and cellular degradation and cellular replication, we're talking about two things that are very closely related. My suspicion is that cancer researchers may be doing more work in terms of anti-aging, in terms of the insights that will be gleaned at the end of the day in terms of the kinds of interventions that we can invoke. I think cancer researchers are probably doing more than anybody else right now in terms of that aspect. I could be wrong, but the point being is that you never know where the next greatest breakthrough may emerge. It may be in simply like genetics, like the kind of Cynthia Kenyon like genetic modifications that similar to our to our lives. So it could be in genetics. We don't know, but the fact is that we should definitely make sure that each of these different compartments are doing their part.
Yeah, well, that's very true. It's good that there's all these research outfits now, even though we cannot predict necessarily very easily what the fallouts for anti-aging will be. Another point that I think is very interesting is the ethical imperative to reduce suffering, and anti-aging has quite a bit to say about this. And we're going to be talking about this, the ethical imperative to reduce suffering in another video. But I think it's worth bringing up because often people call the people doing the research on anti-aging as having like lots of hubris. But and they think, well, this could end up leading to a problem where the world just has too many people and we can't sustain it. But it's kind of strange. Like in some of these circles, the idea that a moratorium on this form of research has been circulated, and a moratorium on other transhuman style technologies as well. Not knowing what the landscape of the future will be like, because we're not there yet, and also we're not the ones making the decision in the future. It's whoever's around in the future, and it may be some of us, but it may be the different people. So actually putting a moratorium or stopping research in anti-aging and other sort of enhancement technologies and technologies that will ultimately reduce suffering, maybe actually superimposing today's hubris onto tomorrow.
And there's so many things I can address on what you just said. It's a huge issue. We could devote an entire subject onto that. It's one that I've also spent a lot of time looking into, which is what are the various objections to life extension. And you do tend, when you do bring it up, even aside from viability, let's say you manage to speak to some groups or some individuals who get it, they realize, oh yeah, this is probably going to happen. You very rarely tend to get like what you were alluding to earlier, which is the ethical component of it, the discussions of the a massive reduction in the kind of toll that aging takes on people. You very rarely get that. I think the reaction tends to be towards the negative. It's like, oh my God, like, what, you're crazy? Like that. You get every argument from, of course, the overpopulation problem, the kind of like neo-Malthusian fears that have emerged in recent times. Of course, the toll on the environment. And again, I'm not trying to dismiss any of these. These are all worth discussing, one after each other, yes, one after another. And of course, then you have even more philosophical arguments like, oh, if you could live forever, that you wouldn't value every day, and the roses wouldn't smell so sweet, and the sunsets wouldn't look so beautiful, and all these sorts of strange arguments. And of course, one of the most common arguments as well is that, oh, we'd be bored in the future, which is my favorite, because I'm like, wow, really? Like, in a future world where we can cure aging, you think you're going to be bored? Really? Like, I can only imagine the other kinds of things that will be at our disposal in such a future that will kind of prevent any kind of onset of boredom. And even anyways, that's one I'm somewhat incredulous when people bring that particular argument up. But yeah, I mean, I would very much like to see those conversations steered more towards, the ethical side of things and the kinds of benefits that may emerge as a result of, anti-aging and the alleviation of suffering. I'm kind of perplexed as to why more people don't think along those lines. I shouldn't say I'm perplexed. I'm not perplexed at all. It's because like I said, the reaction is towards the negative. People just become scared by the prospect. It's so radically different. Like a world where people don't die, which is not entirely true, by the way, because people will still be dying in the future. You're still going to if you get hit by a truck, you still get hit by a truck. And I also think that a lot of people will probably voluntarily choose to end their lives after a certain amount of time as well.
At least it's up to them, right? If they do.
And Adam, isn't that the goal, really? That we have that kind of control over our lives? I mean, that for me, I personally have no, assuming that I could live it long enough to live in a world where, you know, we do have indefinite lifespans. I have absolutely no intention on living forever. I would like to have the luxury, though, of deciding when it is I would like to terminate my own existence. So so I think that yes, it's the fears of the negative consequences that are causing a lot of the negative reaction against life extension at the expense of looking at both. You know, are we overthinking that? Are we overestimating? Like I mean, I just did an article for IO9 about this one because I finally felt I wanted to put out all the arguments about the environmental aspect and the overpopulation aspect, and I was one of the most thorough arguments I've ever put out in terms of defending, or rather not defending, but rather putting to task the Malthusian element in the environmental elements. Again, what I was alluding to earlier, like in a world where we've cured aging, do you really think that we're also going to have the same kind of energy crisis that we have today?
Yeah.
Like, I think that what we're talking about is that we need to start reducing our global footprint, which is already massive and already too big. So this is not a problem for the future. This is a problem for the present. And by virtue of solving the problem for the present, we will at the same time solve it for the future. So we need to work towards both goals simultaneously. And as for the elbow room aspect, I think that's largely overstated. Again, I think it's not space that's the problem. You know, in terms of living space, we're not that crowded on this planet. We're not. That's a myth. Yeah. But even then, we can easily solve problems, whether they be mega cities, ocean cities. Even venturing out into space.
Absolutely.
And of course, even more radical and more speculative types of prescriptions like uploading and having more virtual type existences as well. So there's all those sorts of things to consider.
Yeah, I saw that article just then. It's called "No, Extreme Human Longevity Won't Destroy the Planet," and I'll put a link to that in the description. So
thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And so and also the other article that you did about aging called let's see, what's it called? Google wants you to live forever, and do these starting longevity studies mean your lifespan could double? So yeah, there's a few there I could put in there. Another interesting thing is, yes, what you were mentioning before is people do sort of see anti-aging and may speculate on projecting that one form of technology into the future while all other technologies don't progress. And I think it's silly to think that way. You have to think of technology holistically as a way of
absolutely
of it progressing. And the other thing is about human psychology, where perhaps we're a little bit greedy because maybe that greed could have had a strong selective pressure in our ancestral environment. So those who were greedy had more resources and therefore survived better than those who didn't have as many resources. That being said, the people who think that they're going to die in the next 10 years, maybe they don't care very much about the world in the next 20. The prospect of anti-aging opens the possibility of living for 20 or 40 or 80 or 100 more years than you would normally live. This may actually turn people's heads around, and the people who aren't necessarily as concerned about the environment after they would have normally died without this technology may be a little bit concerned because of the possibility of this technology.
Yes, and I've heard this argument before, and it's a compelling one for sure. It makes you wonder, like, are we, how much of how irresponsible we are when it comes to both our creating our social structures, but also dealing with the environment. Does it have to do with the fact that we live finite existences? And if we live radically longer lives, would we be more careful about how we treat the environment? I think you can make arguments on both sides. I think I think most of us kind of live in denial over the fact. Well, two things I'll say. I mean, many of us, we don't tend to live our lives, assuming that we're kind of mortal beings. I think we all actually, even many will disagree with me, but I think we kind of live our lives assuming that we are kind of going to live a long, 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 long time. So I think that just by our very nature, and even the way we've set up society, we do a very poor job of planning for the future, which is also related to the next point, which is that I do think that we tend to look maybe the next couple of years, maybe we might think towards our retirement. But we certainly don't tend to be we're not very good long-term planners, is what I'm saying. And I would think that maybe pessimistically or cynically, that even in the consideration of radically long lives, I still think we would be pretty crappy long-term planners. So I think, I not that I want to make technology out to be the panacea here, but I do think that I just do think that the general thrust of technological development and making these sorts of technologies viable, both technologically, economically, make it as available to people as much as possible. Those are more likely channels towards making the world like a safer place, making it a cleaner place, making it a more sustainable place. It's just it's going to be the confluence of these converging technologies that will make that happen, and not necessarily the human conception that we need to plan for the future. Because I'm, like I said, pessimistic enough about human nature to know that we're selfish beings and we don't tend to think beyond the next couple of generations, even if we know we're going to have to reap what we sow. So I'd rather that institutions deal with that than individual humans.
Well, it would be nice at least to have the logical possibility as of living for longer life beyond, the financial horizons of a company, for instance, to use as an argument against developing or not developing sustainable technology, because we may not be around to survive it. So I'm definitely going to be keeping a very interested and keen eye on these longevity subjects, and I'm looking forward to more of these interesting articles in IO9 as well. So thanks George for joining us and talking about the media performance of anti-aging. And there was one other point. Yuri Milner, Sergey Brin, and Mark Zuckerberg a little while ago this year got together and started rewarding scientists for doing some good things, and my intuitive memory of it was that it was somehow tied with aging as well. I think that was brought into the discussion. Did you hear about that?
No, sorry, can you fill me in a bit more on that?
Yeah, so Yuri Milner is like a Russian billionaire or something. You know who Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin are?
Right.
So yeah, let me just look it up. Yuri Milner, all these people got together, and there were others other than these three famous people, but they started rewarding scientists for doing some pretty awesome things, which I think is excellent. If there's not enough reward systems to keep people interested and off the bread line to make scientists more I guess optimal with their time, then it's good to have people with large amounts of money throwing money at them and rewarding them, because they're giving them more money than people get from winning the Nobel Prize.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's critical. The bane of the scientist's existence these days, of course, is securing funding. Particularly if you work in a university type institution, you have to justify constantly the research. And even if you're working in a corporate environment, in terms of your scientific work, you obviously have to show economic potential. There's also, you get a lot of buy-in when it comes to the popular diseases and the popular problems. So these days, if you talk about autism, or if you talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, people are willing to throw money at that. But if you're going to talk about maybe some more obscure diseases, whether they be genetic or tropical diseases that affect the developing countries and not the first world countries, you get a weird skewing of the kind of research that gets done, and it's not necessarily those areas that are worthy of the most attention and the most funding. Now, I'm not sure what Zuckerberg and the company are, what they've allocated to be the most worthwhile type breakthroughs or type research, and how they're going with their funding, so I'm immediately a bit suspicious of that. But at the same time, if they're incentivizing scientists in this sort of a way, it's pretty damn exciting, because I think that how awful would it be to know that certain avenues of scientific inquiry would be neglected simply because they couldn't secure funding, or they couldn't obviously raise the money to start to work down those avenues.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's interesting. I think they rewarded a number of scientists. One of them was working on the optogenetics problem. So it's been neuroscientists and whatnot. So yeah, I'll send you the link. It's the Breakthrough
Brain
Prize.
Science. Yeah, brain science is very big right now. Obviously, you've got Obama's brain mapping project, and of course, there's the much bigger one in Europe right now, trying to create the so-called a mind inside a supercomputer. So yeah, that's another sexy area right now that a lot of money is being poured into is the neuroscience and the whole brain mapping initiatives.
Oh yes, I mean, like we live in a time now when we don't need to just kick an inflatable philosophical football around. We can, peer into our heads and see what physically is really going on. And
Yeah,
these sorts of questions, I mean, we've been asking since we've been able to write. Okay, since we've been able to record these ideas. What is the mind and how does it work? It's quite
absolutely.
exciting to be
Yeah,
alive at a time where we're getting these sorts of answers. I'm not saying that we
yeah.
have the answers, but we're getting closer, right?
Getting there, yeah,
Yeah.
slowly but surely, for
Mm.
sure. And the brain mapping initiative is so exciting. The whole
Yes.
connectome idea. Also, seeing that it's being done independently by so many different groups right now, and I'm sure that all this information will converge at some point, and it can only work to obviously enhance our understanding of the human brain and how it works. That's very exciting.
Oh, it's a very exciting
Yeah.
area, and I'm sure we could go on and talk about this. But yeah, given time that we both have limited supplies of, yeah, let's um, close. If there's any concluding remarks you'd like to make, would you?
Uh, were we going to talk about the non-human animal persons program? Or is that going to be a different show?
Yes, absolutely. We're going
Okay.
to talk about the conference coming up. Now,
Okay.
do you want to just give a brief introduction? But I'm going to make a separate video, so it's going to
Okay.
be uploaded
Then.
in different things. So if people are
Okay.
interested, you should watch the next video as well. So, yep.
Then let's just move on.
All right, cool. No
Okay.
worries. Thanks for watching, everybody.